Hello, and welcome to World's Finest True Believers. Each episode, a guest and I will discuss one of our favorite comic book arcs or graphic novels from any publisher. My name is Chris. Thanks for joining us. Now let's get started. Welcome back, listeners, to another great episode of World's Finest True Believers. You haven't even listened to it, and I'm already telling you it's great. I haven't even done it yet, and it's great. So thank you all for joining me again. I want to remind you that World's Finest True Believers, we are part of the Geek Ultimate Alliance Network. We have DC Alliance hosted by Greg and Travis from Earth One. We have Slice of Film and looking at all the news coming out of Hollywood and analyzing a chosen film with a guest, and Star Wars Alliance, both hosted by Katie. Star Wars Alliance, probably going to be talking about Star Wars. Superhero Discussions hosted by Travis from Earth One, where he's looking at reviewing superhero animation, TV, and film. And finally, we have Marvel Alliance hosted by my guest and myself. And so without further ado, in a little bit, we'll reintroduce Travis. If you haven't heard his voice, we call him Travis from Earth 2. But please rate and review the podcast on Twitter. It's going to be not on Twitter, but rate us on Twitter. Why not? Apple Podcasts or whatever your podcatcher choice may be. You can follow me on Twitter at Chris Balga and the show at Finest Believers. And you can follow the network on Twitter at GUA Pod Network. And as always, we appreciate any kind of rating, review, and feedback that you can give us at that point. So now, without further ado, my guest, Travis Snell. Why don't you say hi, Travis?
Hey, how's it going? I'm happy to be on the show proper because I was on it a few times when we made our big announcement. I'm happy to be here actually talking about some comic books today.
Yeah, exactly. Well, pleasure to be on. I know you've been pining to get back on, so I'm glad we were able to schedules to work out to do it. So in case you're listening to our network at that point, but in case they don't know you, Travis, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so as you said, my name is Travis Snell. I've been podcasting for about 5 years now with Geek First, and now we've started this. So now I got a show with you, and then I kind of guest here and there. But yeah, I'm a big fan of all comics. I love Marvel. I love DC. Kind of started reading them at some point, maybe 6 or 5. And I always say we talk about some Marvel Alliance, but it's the 90 animated shows. Those really got me into them. And then I say, oh, there's books of these, and then it kind of just all spiraled down from there. I'm a big fan of the MCU. I got a fiance and 2 kids. I work for Interior Health, so it's a busy time at the hospital. Still, even with a few weeks past of maybe some social distancing being lax, but it's still always running around with a chicken with its head cut off, trying to get stuff done. But yeah, and I'm from Canada as well. I live in Kelowna, BC. That's a little far. It's, if you probably know what Vancouver is, it's about 3 hours from there. So yeah, I've lived here my whole life, so I'm a good Canadian Canucker, So that's me in a nutshell.
Nice. And it's interesting. Our 2 Canadians happen to be both named Travis that have been on this
Yep.
show. So glad to have you on.
It is Earth 1, Earth 2. It's like parallel universes,
Exactly. But the question I asked for first-time guest on World's Finest True Believers is, what is the first comic book or graphic novel that either hooked you, or if you took a break for a while, got you back into it?
So I sporadically read when I was younger. Like I said, I saw an animated series, and then I read oh, here's like a 1 issue out of an arc of like Spider-Man or X-Men stuff like that. Those were the ones I start with. But I'd say the very first one, and I'll probably just go with this answer. The one that I physically bought was my first one I put on the shelf was Batman: The Killing Joke. I'm a massive Batman fan. Batman and Joker. It's kind of tough. It's a cheat, but they're my favorite fictional characters of all time because I feel like they're so intertwined, and it's just one of those as your my cousins read a bunch, and they always go, whether it was my cousins or other people, like, oh, what comics I feel like there's a list of like 20 to 25 comics that as comic fans you need to read, and Batman: The Killing Joke is one of those. Whether you like it or not, just for a historical point of view, it was a big discussion point. So that was my first one. And then honestly, I've never kind of got unhooked. There's definitely times of patterns where I read less, but that's never because of my, oh, I'm not in this, that. It's just life. There's times where usually now I have like a day plan. I try and go, okay, Wednesday or Thursday are my comic book day, so I can try and read new stuff. And I still have a pull list that is ridiculous. There's still so much stuff that's like, oh, I can't wait to get to. So that's going to be in my retirement of, I cannot wait to retire and just have all these great comic books. And especially right now, it's, there's so many eras, but I just feel like as far as the golden ages, like you have so much content happening right now. But yeah, I'd say Batman: The Killing Joke. That was the one that at least I read a full start to finish story, and I went, yeah, I'm hooked. I still love this as much as those moving picture ones. So that was it for me.
Nice. I think that's a great selection. So Why don't you tell our listeners what we're going to be talking about today?
I picked Ultimate X-Men Volume 1, so that's issues 1 to 6. Yeah, it was kind of a reboot written by Mark Millar or Mark Miller, depend who you ask, because everybody gives a different answer, so I never know. I'm always scared if I ever meet this man what to say. I'm just going to probably say, "Hi Mark, I'm a big fan," because I'm never going to say that last name. So,
I
but
think I'll go with Millar just because it's not ER, it's AR. But you look at it at that point, I've heard Miller too. But yeah, I go with Millar.
I always said Millar, but then on a podcast, Kevin Smith once said he was talking to him, and he said, "Oh, it's Miller." But I didn't hear that from
Oh,
his. I didn't hear that from his voice though. And Kevin Smith always says sometimes he's a little snowy sometimes because maybe he's having some substances before a show, right? So it's always an unreliable narrator. So I picked it, written by Mark Millar.
yeah, the arc is entitled "The Tomorrow People." This
Mhm.
was released February through July of 2001. As you said, 6 issues. Mark Millar, Andy, and Adam Kubert were our pencilers. And interesting why there's two pencilers on this. Originally, Adam and Andy were supposed to illustrate Ultimate X-Men so that they could be published on a regular basis, like trading back and forth to make sure it's on time. But Andy moved over to illustrating what became even a bigger storyline, Origin, which tells the story for the
Mhm.
very first time ever, the who Wolverine is at that point, give his a true origin. So he was unable to continue. So that's why it became basically at that point Adam taking full pencilship duties at one point. But they both have their names to this for different issues. So when did you first read this? Did you read this first run, or did you discover it later on?
So this is part of the reason why I picked it, because it's definitely one of my favorite arcs, and I think it has a lot to do with nostalgia. This was the first ever comic book, along with Ultimate Spider-Man, that I was buying issue by issue. We've kind of talked about it on Marvel Alliance, where I'm the same camp as you. Nowadays, I don't really do that unless there's an arc I'm really into. I usually wait for a trade paperback or whatnot. And again, just because life, I could never really. But there's a few ones I go, okay, I'm going to read this, and that was it. So because it came out, like you said, what, 2000, 2001, right?
Yes, yes, yes. This one started in 2001.
Yeah, so that's when I was starting to get allowance as a kid. So I had some cash flow and whatnot. And I just remember kind of, X-Men had come out and then Spider-Man was coming out. And it just felt like I had a small group of friends that read comic books, but the hype was ramping up as far as, man, the stuff that we love is starting to get out there. And people know who Wolverine is. My mom knows who Wolverine is, not just, oh, it's that cartoon. It's like, oh, that's that guy, Hugh Jackman. He was in that movie we took you to. So this and Spider-Man, those two together, because it was a big deal that it was like relaunching. Because like I said, I had some cousins that were older that were into it and just telling me all about this, and it's like, wow, really? And especially as a kid, now we've seen so many relaunches. It's just like a common thing where it's like, New 52, DC Rebirth, stuff like that, all new Marvel or whatnot. But as a kid or a younger, like I said, I think I was probably 10, 12, somewhere in there. You're like, oh my goodness, they're starting over. They're doing all this new fresh. This is revolutionary. So it's like, I got to be on this. And Spider-Man X-Men from Marvel are my go-tos along with Daredevil. So I jumped on it, and I've read the entire thing, but I eventually stopped reading issue by issue because I think it lessens a little bit as far as near the back half. But the first, I'd say, 4 volumes are some of I think some of the best. I think there's some things that aren't. There's some storylines that are a little rushed, and I'll talk about that today. But I think for me, nostalgia-wise, and just the creativity, and my last point is, I think it did a great job. Ultimate X-Men is, there's always a fine line with adaptations of characters. You're just talking about Travis Earth One. Me and him always talk about and bicker about Jared Leto's Joker. He's someone that goes, "Hey, I love that adaptation," and I go, "For me, it's too far gone. I can't see the Joker anymore." And I think this is a good version of, it's taking the X-Men that you know and love, but it's doing a few tweaks, doing a little difference. It almost at times does feel like a what if scenario, but it has good substance in there. And I'm also now just a big Mark Millar fan, Mark Millar, whatever you want to say. I'm a big fan of his work in general. So yeah, I read, like I said, I think volumes 1 to 4 in real time. And now I own those ones as trade paperbacks, everything. But I was just caught in the hype of new Marvel, new universe, and I was excited to jump into it.
Yeah, I agree. I also read this first one. I almost positive I have every one of them in single issues as
Mhm.
well, and I've got some of them in trades. This is one I'm a I'm a trade paperback omnibus collector, and I would love for them, Marvel, to finally put these together in
Oh yeah.
omnibus. Like from the Ultimate Universe, I've already got the Ultimates omnibus at that point, but the Ultimates, Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man were my favorites out of this whole thing, and it was great. So yeah, so I also read this first run and outstanding. So let me read a quick synopsis about Ultimate X-Men Volume 1, The Tomorrow People. The X Men are one of the most celebrated Marvel teams in comic book history. Ultimate X Men ushers in one of the biggest reboots for the franchise where you may see familiar characters, but they are not always the way you remember them because this is the Ultimate Universe. In the inaugural arc, the government begins building and releasing Sentinels to hunt down mutants after the Brotherhood of Mutant Supremacy declares war against humans. Charles Xavier sends Jean Grey on a scouting mission to find mutants with powerful abilities to help launch a positive face on a mutant kind before Magneto and his Brotherhood of Mutants can provoke an all-out war. And that's what I think. I think you said it earlier. What made this universe so is particularly with the X-Men and Spider-Man to some extent, to the same extent, is that you take this history, you take these events, you take these characters that you know on all sides, and just tweak them. And I think that was what kept me coming back to the Ultimate Universe. I knew they were coming at different angles. I knew, well, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do? How are you going to bring in this character? That's what made me a reader throughout the entire line, is just when are they going to bring in this character? When are they going to tackle this storyline, and how are they going to do it?
I agree. You're always on your toes, and I think it's such the ultimate era of Marvel. It's such an interesting era to look at because I was listening to you read off the Ultimate runs you like, and you didn't read off Iron Man or Fantastic Four. And I'm the same thing. If I read those, and those are versions for me, I was not a fan of. I was not a fan of what they did with Reed in Fantastic Four and Sue and Brand. I was not.
I do take it back. The one thing I did like about him is the Marvel Zombies they brought in with
Yeah.
Ultimate Fantastic Four, but that's about it for me.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good call. And then the other one for me was the same thing with Tony Stark. I was not a fan of the younger one, but that's where it's different because even you look at something like Spider-Man very quickly as they build up to Kraven the Hunter, and he's just a reality TV show that star at first that doesn't know anything, gets taken on one punch, and it's these things of they're walking on a tight wire. But I felt the same thing like you just said. Spider-Man and Wolverine. I liked the Ultimates, but I think Spider-Man and X-Men they did it the best.
Yes,
in my
they
opinion.
were the strongest.
Yeah, and they, like I said, they've got that fine line of something new, something fresh, but something you know. Because you read that synopsis to the story, that could be 100 different X-Men stories, right? It's Magneto trying to take down the government while they're sending Sentinels. That's true and try story that's going to work every time. And for me, and I guess just to give some more context why I picked this with X-Men, I think it's an unfortunate thing, but you look at our world right now, especially politically and what's going on, is X-Men, and that's why I say it's unfortunate. This story of outcasts or people being rejected is a story that is from when it started to now is just as relevant. This, especially when I was rereading this for the show, I thought just everything going on right now, it was crazy. If this is, that's why I'm very excited for a potential movie. And that's why I think one day with the MCU, maybe using some Ultimates as kind of some inspiration, because the same way Black Panther, this story is just riddled with people hating the X-Men, but almost in new different ways. It's on a grander scale because you have this news and government, and this was in 2001, so the internet wasn't a big thing, but they're kind of hinting at that now, you know, and you kind of have a more brasher, more cruel Magneto in this, because it's not the 60s where he even sometimes has this outlook of, you know, I want things to be better, but I have to do it this way. This is someone compares him to Hitler in this comic, and he goes, "Oh no, that's just a human. That's not me." But he is Hitler in this comic book. How vicious and violent he is. There's no redeeming, and if you read the rest of Ultimate, there is no redeeming this Magneto, and that's where I like where there. And I prefer, and that's where again where these editions work. I prefer a Magneto where he is on that side where he could flip to good at any moment if he just has the right guidance between Charles or whatnot. But I do like this version of, no, you know what? Enough is enough. They're not going to change. I'm not going to listen to Charles. I'm not going to listen to anybody. I'm not going to listen to my children. And he's brutal in this comic book. And that's where I think in general, this, I remember even reading younger and rereading this again, is just, I'm always reminded, just even the first opening panels, they have the Sentinels coming in and they're killing all these mutants. And there's that one panel where the Sentinel's going to step on them. But the way they put it and the way they kind of pencil and everything, that it looks like it's set up for the classic, oh, this character's about to get killed, and then the team comes in and saves them. it doesn't. The Sentinel just kills him in front of a bunch of people, and it's brutal and it's sad and it's tough. It's tough to watch or tough to read, and it is very dark. But I think it's known because you need to put the stakes as far as what the X-Men, what Magneto are fighting for. And again, I think the X-Men in general, whether it is race, whether it is sexual gender, everything like that, these stories are, like I've said before, tried and true to issues that many people are facing. And I think this does a good job of that as well. Again, hitting those classic notes, but bringing into, at that time, the 2000s, what was a more current thing. Like I said, now, but even then, even reading this 20 years later, it still feels relevant, which is, scary and not what I want, but it still shows how well they put down the story.
No, I agree with all that. So, but yeah, we're definitely going to delve into some of your favorite parts and moments of these 6 issues, because a lot does happen in 6 issues. But so we'll go with our showrunners first. We'll look at Mark Millar, our main writer for this. Born, he's a Christmas Eve baby, born December 24th, 1969, in Cambridge, Scotland. He went. While he was trying to learn to read, his very first comic was The Amazing Spider-Man number 121, which featured the death of Gwen Stacy. Some of his influences he names as Alan Moore and Frank Miller as his biggest influences, but he also names Grant Morrison, Peter Milligan, Warren Ellis, Garth Ennis, Jason Aaron, and Scott Snyder as some of his influences as well, people he looks to. When he was 18 years old, he actually interviewed Grant Morrison, who was doing his first major American work, Animal Man. And he told Morrison that he wanted to be both a writer and artist, and Morrison suggested that he needs to pick one. He says it's very difficult in this industry to be both writer and artist, so he leaned towards writing. His first job in the comic industry was when he came out of high school writing Trident Savior, and kind of goes on from there. During the 1990s, he works on titles such as 2000 AD, Sonic the Comic, and Crisis. In 1993, he teams with Grant Morrison and John Smith and created the controversial 8-week run of 2000 AD called The Summer Offensive. He went on and came to the attention of DC Comics in 94 and took over writing duties of Swamp Thing for the first 4 issues, also co-writing those with Grant Morrison. And when Grant Morrison left after those 4 issues, Miller continued the title from then. He also continued to work with DC with JLA, The Flash, and Aztec, The Ultimate Man. In 2000, he replaced Warren Ellis on The Authority for DC's Wildstorm imprint. In 2001, he launched his Ultimate X-Men for Marvel Comics, and also teams with Brian Hitch to collaborated on The Ultimates, their version of the Avengers. In 2006, he joined by artist Steve McNiven and began writing the Marvel miniseries Civil War. He joined up with also writing Old Man Logan storyline, which the film Logan is based off of. In 2004, he created his own company called Millar World, published independently a number of books, a 50-50 split between Millar and the collaborating artist. His first book for that was Wanted, which became a very big hit, followed by Kick-Ass, which also became a big hit. And also a number of other titles, Nemesis, Kingsman, Hit Girl, Jupiter's Legacy. Well, the big kind of claim to fame with Miller, besides the awesome books, is that it was purchased, Millar World was purchased by Netflix in 2017. And it was the first acquisition for Netflix, and the third time in history, with Millar noted that the comic book company has been purchased by a studio. And so Millar will run Millar World with his wife and publishing new comics under the Netflix label. So Kick-Ass and Kingsman were not part of the deal, though. So you will not see new iterations of those. So that's kind of interesting, kind of very big, very quick rise to success. Great writer. I really do enjoy his work.
Yeah, I think it just shows you list off all that work, and there's just so many classic stories. There's so many ones that writers would be happy with just getting one of those, right? They'd be happy to get an Old Man Logan or Civil War to be like, you're known for this, and that's just a thing amongst itself. And yeah, I definitely feel always that I kind of forget that he has like a close relationship with Grant Morrison. I always feel, because Grant Morrison, I think, is all obviously a bit more on the weirder side as his tales and whatnot, but you can see Millar takes inspiration from that, and Grant Morrison, another great writer. But yeah, it's just, he kind of for a while was just knocking out with hit after hit, and I'm excited to see, because if he didn't sell, I guess I imagine Nemesis would be including that Netflix deal, right? And
Yeah.
that could be very interesting. So and you already talked about this before, but with the Ultimates, that was a big inspiration. Many people, Zach Penn as a writer, put that Ultimates is kind of what they looked at for Avengers, and that's kind of followed suit where there's been a lot of Ultimate kind of storyline based people. Like Spider-Man is a bit more Ultimate than it is classic, right? So
Mhm.
who knows, if you've never read this, I would say give this a read, whether it's just this volume or the other ones, because I think there's some inspiration that the X-Men could be getting from this. Who knows, because there's also House of X, which is very popular right now, so that could also be,
Mhm.
we're gonna maybe, wink wink nudge nudge, talk about that on Marvel Alliance one day. But even then, I could see them taking aspects of this story into present day.
No, I agree with that. So now we head to our pencilers, brothers. It's not just last names for a coincidence. We'll start with Adam Kubert. He handled the penciling duties on issues 1 through 4. He began his comic career as a letterer for DC Comics and created the artwork for the company in is the story Gremlins, published in Sergeant Rock number 394, published in November of 1984. From 93 to 1996, he illustrated 17 issues of Larry Hama's run of Wolverine. Between issues 75 to 102. His first issue on the series featured the after effects of Magneto ripping out the adamantium from Wolverine's body, the Fatal Attraction storyline. The Kubert drew the Weapon X limited series, part of Age of Apocalypse in 95. From 97 to 98, he illustrated 12 issues of Peter David's Incredible Hulk run from 454 to 467. 2001, joining Ultimate X-Men at that point before leaving. And then illustrated 16 various other issues, beginning with number 7. Excuse me, I didn't mean to say he left. Then he began a run of Ultimate Fantastic Four, working with Millar and Brian Michael Bendis. Both Adam and his brother signed exclusive contracts with DC Comics in 2005. Kubert's first project was illustrating Last Son, Superman story arc with Jeff Johns and Richard Donner, which ran from Action Comics 844, 847, 851, and Action Comics number 11. He followed his work on Superman, penciling Final Crisis tie-in, DC Universe, The Last Will and Testament, written by Brad Meltzer. His last work for his latest tenure at DC was Batman and the Outsiders special, released in 2009. In May 2009, he marked his return to Marvel, doing some work on Wolverine. In 2012, he penciled issues 8 through 10 and 12 of the Marvel crossover Avengers versus X-Men, and then drew issues 4 through 6 of Jonathan Hickman's run on the Avengers. And in 2017, Kubert began penciling Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, written by another amazing writer, Chip Zdarsky.
Yeah, that is kind of the same thing as Miller. Is just that's a stacked run. That's a lot of good art, and yeah, I enjoy their art. They have quite a different style to me. It's something that I find it's funny because I can find some characters that they do. No, I don't like the look of them at all, but then other ones I go, that's the perfect look. Like the way they draw Wolverine to me is kind of one of the ways I always picture him. Just that fluffy hair, his veins are all over the place. But then there's some ways where like I don't think Jean even in this one is like drawn or like penciled the best at times. Like it's a different look, but it's something that I don't know. But it's just even looking at all of their other work as far as characters, I love their Spider-Man. So they got some really impressive work. Like I said, I don't know if I did a top 10 if they would be in it, but they'd definitely be in kind of like the honorable mentions for some of their designs of certain characters. And even then though, I think it helps because this Ultimate X-Men has a very different look than even Ultimate Spider-Man, but I think it fits for when you say Ultimate X-Men, what those first 3 volumes at least look like. I remember, I think it's volume 3 when they both change up, and I wasn't a big fan of they do like a big change up. I think when they both leave this and they start passing it on, and I was not a fan of that, and that really took me out. And that really, I think that was the first time in my life that showed that, man, pencilers and artists are really important, because if you're into a look and it changes, it could take you out of it for a while. It's kind of like an actor getting recast. So I'm a big fan of these guys still.
Yeah, they're inkers or pencilers, just colorists. They just have all so well together. So his brother Andy just did issues 5 and 6. Very similar kind of storyline. They're a very famous family, very comic book famous family. He started his career also at DC Comics as a letterer in 1980. His first credited work appeared with the story Old Soldiers Never Die in Sergeant Rock number 393, published in 1984. He later drew for Adam Strange and the Batman versus Predator intercompany crossover.
Love that story. It's
Oh,
actually
oh, I
really
do
good.
too. An occasional cover artist for Uncanny X-Men, drawing the first cover appearance of Gambit. An X-Men classic, Kubert later served as fill-in penciler for Uncanny X-Men number 279, 280, and in 288 before becoming the regular penciler in X-Men Volume 2, starting with number 14, following the departure of Jim Lee to form Image Comics. I would say that was probably one of the best changeovers in the sense of not too Jim Lee, I love him as an artist, but I think when I say a transition artist that would not be too rocking, like you said, like when you could tell a huge change in artist, you can tell when Jim Lee left that Uncanny X-Men, but it wasn't as hugely drastic because I think Andy has he has a similar style, not exactly the same, but there's similar ways he draws the
Yeah.
characters, that the transition I think was a little bit easier. He drew The Wedding of Cyclops and Jean Grey in X-Men number 30, March 1994. He drew Amazing X-Men Limited Series as part of Age of Apocalypse in 95. With writers Bill Jamas, Joe Quesada, and Paul Jenkins, he produced the Origin Limited Series, revealing the early history of Wolverine, which is why he left Ultimate X-Men after only 2 issues. He collaborated with novelist Neil Gaiman on one of my favorite stories, Marvel 1602, an 8-issue limited series published in 2003 to 2004. Both Kubert and his brother Adam signed exclusive contracts with DC Comics in 2005. Andy became the penciler of the Batman series with writer Grant Morrison, introducing Damian Wayne. In 2011, he illustrated the DC limited series Flashpoint. He is one of the artists in Dark Knight 3, The Master Race, co-written by Frank Miller and Brian Azzarello. And as of 2018, Kubert is collaborating with writer Scott Snyder on the new Challengers, part of his Dark Metal project.
Hmm. Yeah, I now that you list it off, I don't know if I've ever done artists or pencilers or whatnot as like a top 10 one time. I'm gonna have to make that on a list because honestly, they might be in there now. At first, it's like, oh, I don't know, but then when you just keep reading them off, like especially like some of the stuff in the Age of Apocalypse stuff like that, that is some really unique. Because that's the
Mhm.
thing. Like this sounds like an insult. I don't mean me, but like I feel sometimes their art is really harsh, but that's in a good way. Like it's really kind of it's the edges are they're very you can see them, you can very sternly see them, but it's not. It just it makes it so it stands out in such a different way. It pops where it's just kind of like somewhere Ultimate Spider-Man to me, or something like I was talking about Batman the Killing Joke with Brian Boland, like that art feels like it's all kind of one page. It's kind of feels very almost animation like, where with them it is still feels like it's much a drawing. And like I said, that's much to like a pro that I'm shouting out there. Like I said, it sounds like a weird pro to give them, but it's harsh in a good way where it just is very
Mhm.
up in your face. It's very distinct. That's maybe the best way I could say to do. And that's where I say sometimes there's maybe some designs where I go, oh, like I don't know if I'm feeling that, but there is it's still like a design to it. You can look at it and go, oh, okay, that's a Kubert right there.
No, I agree with it. So before we get into some background of the creation, looking at an interview with Mark Millar, we're going to take a little quick ad break. So as you know, listeners, these ads help support Geek Ultimate Alliance Network, keep the lights on. We don't get to choose what ads come on, and they can be a bit loud. So I want to give you a 3 count to turn the volume down before they come on. 3, 2, 1. We'll be right back. So let's get into some background before we start delving into the issues themselves. This was an interview with the website Sequential Chart in March 2002, entitled The Ultimate Writer, Mark Millar by Barb Lynn Cooper. This was a very long interview, but some of the portions focused on the creation of the Ultimate X-Men line. So she asked, how much research did you have to put into Ultimate X-Men when you first started writing it? How did you go about the research that you had to do for the title? Millar says, Joe, referring to Joe Quesada, he liked the Authority, and Bill got into it too. They called me up and asked me to write X-Men when Brian Michael Bendis had passed on the project. And my reason was that originally he said no. And his reason behind saying no the first time was that he'd only ever read 3 X-Men comics his entire life, all very good and all written by Chris Claremont. And he had zero familiarity with the characters. And they told me to go see the movie that had just come out and write a proposal. Saw the movie, liked it a lot, and then wrote something with almost no knowledge of the characters and expected them to wipe their butts with it. However, they felt that the problems with the X-Men in recent years was that the lack of mainstream appeal, and suggested that they be because I knew bugger about it. That's his that's it. I should be the guy. It seems to have worked, and although I must admit I'm more comfortable with year 2 of the book, I've since gone back and read some of the Claremont and Burns issues, and they are absolutely phenomenal. They still hold up incredibly well, and they are a huge influence in guys that I admire, like Morrison and Alan Moore. Alan Moore, particularly, adapted the Proteus story for his excellent Captain Britain run and Warriors Marvel Men strip. It's quite shocking when you read how much old Gandalf, referring to Moore, piffed through Claremont, and I suppose we're all like that when we're just starting out. I mean, that's an amazing revelation that he barely read X-Men and was able to produce something like this.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't know that. So yeah, that's quite fascinating. And yeah, anybody that shouts out like the Claremont run as maybe their favorite comic books of all time, you're gonna get no argument from me. It's up there in my top 10. That's just some classics. It's one of those things where it just becomes so cliche to say because everyone says, "Oh, it's a classic,"
Mhm.
but it really is a classic when you look at what they did together, that team. So it's one of those that it still holds the test time, and yeah, that makes sense. And that's I think Marvel again. I think that's why the Ultimate Era is so interesting to me because I think they knew, okay, we need change, we need some fresh stuff. Hey, there's this talented guy, but he doesn't know much of X-Men. That's fine. Put him in the game, coach, and as he
Mhm.
said, it ended up working out.
Yeah, the next question I was asked, it seems as if Cyclops is a character that you have been most affection for, at least with the evidence of the first storyline. I've always found him to be boring, except in Ultimate X-Men. What are you doing to the character that makes him so interesting that other characters aren't? And Millar says, I don't know. He just always seemed cool to me. He looks like a guy. He's shagging the best bird, referring to Jean Grey. And Wolverine always looked like a guy who had who who had to settle for a five knuckle shuffle. Last question she asks him is, speaking of changes in character, none of the Ultimate X-Men team is quite the way he or she appeared in previous iterations. The best transformation in my mind was Jean Grey has changed from a repressed good girl into a smart, sexy, independent, near adult. Why did you rewrite Jean that way? Is it true that you based her on a girl you once had a crush on? Millar says the character kind of evolved as I was writing, and I now have a very clear idea in my head what these characters are like. It sounds kind of insane, but it's quite archaeological sometimes, in that you have to chip away over months and months and months to uncover a plot or a character as opposed to just sitting down and making them up. Jean really gets fleshed out in my second year and is very complex girl. She's based on a few people, but I kid you not, I've actually based her on a little of you, referring to Barb in the article, in a sense that she's cool, Anglophile, and slightly more mature than others. She just seems like the kind of girl whose favorite movie would be Sid and Nancy, and she'd like Paul Weller. I've even got her shopping in a Carnaby on Carnaby Street in issue 16 of the run and buying shoes from Shelley's. So there you go. The man who just reads it, respects the past, but also puts his own spin on it.
Yeah, and I think also we'll talk about a few times, but I think it works out quite well. It was I'd say out of all the characters, it was the biggest kind of overhaul of somebody, but it ended up paying off.
No, that's I like how Jean it makes that change. I think it's a great step for her character. So, being that this is a first arc, really you could know the X-Men. A lot of us did when we read this, but you don't. You absolutely need absolute no knowledge of this, of anything to do with the X-Men, because you're gonna see what their iteration is in the Ultimate Universe. So again, it'll help, but
Mhm.
it's not required. What do you think?
No, I don't think so. And I think they kind of had their cake and eat it too. The very first issue is a lot of backstory very quickly. It's because
Mhm.
she's doing that, and you can look at some of the films too. The way Xavier and Magneto in First Class go around recruiting. That's the first issue of this. That's what Jean is going. She's going to different places with each person being like, I don't really need you. And she kind of gives them a pitch. She shows them her powers. And they give you the old class as far as, hey, this is Magneto, this is the Savage Land, this is Charles and them relationship. They really speed through that, because I think one that gives context to people that are new readers, or is for old readers that go, I've heard the story 1,000 times. Do I really need to see Charles and Xavier again be fleshed out? And they do flesh it out in a new way, but the old way, as far as their core relationship, they get to that really quickly. So I think it's one that that's why I think it was so successful. It worked for everybody. It worked for the old school people, and it worked for the new school.
Yeah, I think it's great. So, well, here's the part of the time where I turn it over to you, Travis. We got 6 issues. We're not going to go issue by issue, but why don't you talk us about like kind of your favorite part, favorite moments, maybe in this 6 issue run, who kind of stood out to you as some of your favorite characters in this new Ultimate X-Men universe?
Well, we were just talking about her, so we can start with Jean, and because especially so the Logan and Jean dynamic is one of my favorites. That's the reason my second daughter's name is Logan Jean Snail. It is that combo of those are my two favorite X-Men. I also think it just says a lot about my life, because luckily I met the woman with now and this great relationship and fiance. But I feel like many times dating the very first time, it was always that, will they, won't they sort of deal, and it's always wrong time, wrong place, this and that. And same thing with Jean and Wolverine. So for me, reading this the first time, I was quite taken aback, because the story is always she's with Scott, and that's the full time they're together forever. And maybe there's some what ifs or some like Age of Apocalypse, like, okay, Wolverine and Jean were together, but it's very, very minor. So I remember reading this, and when they started getting together, I was kind of in shock, because one, I'm a fan of those characters and I was always pulling for them, but I'm like, nah, she's gonna stick with Scott, the good guy. And I felt like in my life, probably when I was reading this at that age, but then when I got older into like teen years and started dating, I always felt like I was that guy of like, no way am I the bad boy, but I was always like the third wheel of like, oh, if this guy wasn't around, you'd be the great option. But no, look, I have Scott Summers. Like, yeah, he's pretty handsome, I get it. And then you slink off back into Canada, and I do my own thing. So I was taken aback when that happened. And again with Jean, I think both changes of the character are really well, because Jean there's a part of me that I think they flesh it out well, but even on concept, you wondered the way Jean Grey is. You don't know why she's exactly attracted to Wolverine, but this Jean Grey, you know why, because she is a student. She is trying her best, but she has kind of that adventurous, almost dangerous side. She's not the Jean Grey you know and love. She's a Jean Grey that's going to speak her mind. Where Jean Grey in the past, well, she will speak her mind at times, but she's kind of a recluse. She's kind of with Scott. She's with Xavier. She's much kind of almost like in those X-Men films with Femke Jensen, just kind of a hand going around like, do you need help? Do you need help? This is Jean kind of taking control. She's the one that's recruiting everybody. So I think they have a great dynamic, because one, it wasn't the, oh, she's with Scott and they do the whole, oh, will they, won't they? And even then it would have been different if she leaves Scott and then she goes with Logan. No, she starts the relationship with Logan. They're the first thing. And we don't know what would happen, because in this, and they do some really weird stuff happens in the future, but in this arc, you don't know what's going to happen, because she's kind of saying like, I wish I didn't meet you. She's kind of saying that she's on a path in her life, and meeting Wolverine is a detour that she doesn't want to take, but she can't put her finger on it, and there's an attraction there. And I think people can relate to that at all time. I love, as far as cinematic relationships, Daredevil, Elektra, Catwoman, Batman, because same thing as Jean Logan, there's that dynamic where they'll will, they won't they, they're not exactly right for each other, but there's a connection they feel, Kylo Ren and Rey, stuff like that. So I always drawn to that, because there's so much layers you can add to that. And I think in other iterations it's had that well here, because at the same time, if he didn't tell her about his reasoning for being there, what would happen? Would Scott have ever been in a relationship? I would think so down the line, because Wolverine is not the most suitable person to be with. But even with this Jean, you could see it, because she's a little bit different. So I think they nailed that dynamic, those two characters. And before a third overview, I think as far as Wolverine, he is still that brute. He's still that kind of badass, but the changes they make to him is a change that I honestly think this is what they're going to do in the MCU, as far as they may take other inspirations, but I think they may use this route of Logan being a semi anti-hero villain first and then incorporate him, because it's a fun way of, you meet him, oh, he's part of the team, but no, really, he's there to kill Xavier, and it's a scary thing.
No, it's great. I'm glad you brought it up. Continue.
Yeah, oh no, it's a scary thing, because when you're reading this, and it's not the last issue till he tells Jean and she throws him out of bed, and it's a good scene, but the whole issue, you don't know his motivation. You don't know, is he there with Jean? And even Magneto at one point says, he always gets detoured by a girl, but he gets the job done. So when you're reading this the first time and they had already made these other changes, you believe that maybe Wolverine's going this route. And again, even in this issue, where I think the negatives of this issue in the 6 runs is I think there's some things that are a little rushed. So I think him fully jumping on board with I see Xavier's vision, I think that's a little rushed. I think they could have maybe spread that out a little bit, but still it shows he has a change of character and a change of heart. He doesn't. So he starts as that terrible Wolverine, but Wolverine to me has always been a guy that has the biggest heart. He's just afraid to show it. And he eventually, he doesn't get his mind right. He tells Jean, and that shows his evolution of her, the class, Xavier, that he wants to change his ways. And it shows the hope that Xavier expires. So whether it is those two dynamics separately or them together, I think for me, it's one of the highlights of the series and just the series overall as it continues. So you were going to say?
Yeah, it's one of those. I love it that they did the twist with Wolverine being at first an agent for Magneto. I think that was a really cool twist. It's one of those things where he is that anti-hero, but the fact that he's a cold-hearted killer at first, it makes sense by who he is. They said, okay,
Yep.
we can totally see this. I like the idea of the team they assemble. This is not your standard, you know, original X-Men. You got some of them on there. You've got Iceman, you've got Jean, you've got Scott, you've got Beast, but then you throw Storm, Colossus, and eventually Wolverine on it. I think that's a good amalgamation of the original First Class with the Genesis one,
Yeah.
where we get the new class coming in. I thought those were some interesting choices, and that their suits are ones that mask them from the Sentinels. That's pretty cool.
I
No,
love that touch. Yeah,
yeah.
and that's something honestly, and that's where we talk about a little bit. Is just I do see MCU taking some of this because that sounds like something Tony Stark would have made, like that sounds like something that's already baked into that universe. And I think even with a lineup in the future of movies, I don't know about Colossus because of Deadpool, but I think that lineup for this, and like I said, maybe a potential MCU film, that mixture of old and new really worked out. And that's why I think, again, you asked me about, old viewers or new or readers jumping onto it. I think they did a good job of it. Was new stuff, but there was something there for every reader. And that's where if you liked that old school X-Men, it's there. If you liked the 90s and the animated series and you loved Storm, it's there, and there with new takes, like someone like Beast feels like a different character.
Yeah, no, I think they gave it, and they also gave some time with a number of these characters to kind of get a little bit to knowing them, even though, yes, there's many more stories we do get to know them better. But yeah, I think it was great introductions of the characters. What are some of your favorite parts or moments from this arc?
Yeah, my last point I would say on Wolverine, and then I'll move on, is the only thing I really liked, and I think this is something again they could do in the movies, is I love the mystique they give him as far as he's only like there's only one known image of him, and it's really blurry. They list
Yep.
off all these things he's done and killing him, and that's where I think there's something in movies you could really build up of introduced. There's whisperings of a Wolverine. I really like that concept in here. And I like anytime they've used the art, whether it's the TV monitor or flashbacks, it's kind of like that almost caveman, but sketch drawing where you can see what it is, but it's like the colors are really light. It's very different than everything else. So every time they were talking about Wolverine, they used some of those images I really liked. I talked about this, so I'll only talk about it quickly and then I'll throw to what you thought. But yeah, as Magneto, again, it's always, like I said, it's not my favorite interpretation because I like the more kind of almost anti-hero route, but it's something I think was warranted, especially in this series. I feel this X-Men is a bit more brutal than some others. Maybe you got stuff like Age of Apocalypse stuff when it gets really dire, but just to start off, there's a lot of killing. Just something that is a really image that has always stuck with me is when he goes and invades America and he's taken the president and he's just stripped him down and he has him on the news camera and it's just the president there naked and he said, I just made this guy lick my boots. That's not like the worst thing to say, but for me it's still just stretched out like that's a awful thing. Like this is a guy that has nothing but malice in his heart now, and I want to get your thoughts. What do you think about this rendition of Magneto just kind of being he's fully given up on there's going to be a peaceful or there could be a chance. He's just going to we kill before we get killed.
Yeah, I do buy this
Mhm.
character in this portrayal of it. I think it brings how serious he's taken his vision. Like there is no negotiation. It's either my way, and humans are not a part of it. And the massacre that he exhibits on Washington D.C. when he takes control of the Sentinels and going and taking out the humans and taking down the president. No, not trying to take down the president, but I mean it is brutal and his methods are brutal. And the fact that, I like seeing this Magneto. I don't like the character, what he's doing,
Yeah.
obviously, but I like that we're going down this path because it is a very hard nosed, because in the world there are hard nosed people like that,
Mhm.
and that believe this, and so he is truly committed to his vision.
Well, and he's becoming like when I talked about earlier with the Hitler comparison, I think they maybe address this a little bit more down the line, but he doesn't even know that he's becoming the thing he hates, the thing that tore him apart, his family apart. He's so blinded by it. It is for a good cause, but the cause is blinding him so much. He just writes that off when he gets compared to Hitler. He goes, "Oh, that's a human issue. That's not us." It's just like, but that's what you're doing. You're profiling people, you're taking everybody. And they just give him some good one-liners in here. There's one moment where someone says like, "Oh, you're gonna do this to humanity," and he says, "No, just America." Which is, again, when I was reading that, as far as being relevant, it's just like they hit on these themes. The relationship he has with Petro it's awful. Like, in a way, I'm praising it, but just the way he treats him when he tells Scott that he says later on when we're all together, "Call me father." He said, "You might not know why, but call me father."
Yeah.
And it's just, as viewers, we know why, because he just wants to, again, just shove more dirt down Pedro's throat. And again, it gets explained a bit more later on, but I love that conversation Pietro and Scarlett have, as far as, he's disappointed in us. He's embarrassed because it shows us one flaw or his one weak moment with the Homo sapien. And Pietro's just there, like, it sets up, and that's where I think it is a little quick, because it literally is just those two issues where they really set that up. But it does set up the turn where this is a guy that's been pounded on his whole life by his dad. All he wants is his respect. And you have someone like Scott, who was on the other side, who's been with them maybe for like a couple days or a week, at least a cup of coffee. We don't really know the timeline in this as far as time passage, but he's been there not that long. But Magneto's hugging him, he's praising him all the time. Pedro can't get anything. So they set up that turn really well. So I think the dynamic
Mhm.
of the more, because I think when I was reading it issue by issue the first time, I was like, oh, I don't know if I like this, because that takes away that fun dynamic of he's trying to do the right thing. He's just going about the wrong way with extreme measures. But we understand where this was now, he's so cold hearted. But I think they flesh out all the other characters, because even just Toad and Blob, he's very rude and crass with them. Where in other X-Men, oh, of course, he's a villain, so he can be that way. But in other times, it feels like a real brotherhood. He feels like you're with me, and you're my family, and we're gonna do this together. Where this feels like I'm the leader and you're all my followers, and you get in line or I'm done with you. And he's very scary in this. And you brought up the Sentinels, the artwork. There's great moments like the Sentinel. I love the way they draw the Sentinels, but there's that one scene where he's just in the middle of the sky and there's all these Sentinels he's taking control of, because they sent them to this
Yep.
savage land, and it just stands out. Or when he's going in the White House and they're all flying, it really cool panels and really, really, really nice visuals what they do with those two, especially because this is a weapon that was chosen to kill him, so he's just using against him. I love that. Like, why would they send anything with aluminum my way? And it's just, he's very
Mhm.
arrogant as well too, which the other Magneto can be, but this is him to the nth degree of being arrogant.
Yeah, and I like the kind of, as we always spoil on the show, the twist they have where Scott leaves,
Mhm.
quote unquote, leaves the X-Men to join, Magneto at that point, which is, again, it's a ruse at that point. But, at the time, it's a little believable. When you read it the first time, you don't really notice what you should notice at that point. But I thought that was kind of a nice shock for the character, saying like he's always been, for many years until recently, in the last 10 years or so, he's always been, pro Charles, pro Charles, pro Charles. Well, we get a couple of issues in and he's already leaving at that point. Can't stand what he's doing. Again, a ruse, a plan, but it sold me at first.
Well, it keeps you on your toes, and even then, it is a ruse and a plan, but it still feels this Scott has a bit more edge, because I feel like some of the prime examples of the goody two shoe characters is a Superman, is a Captain America, but then the next one I throw up is a Scott Summers. Because if you read him many issues, and that can be the trap I feel some people fall into writing Scott Summers. I think some of the movies did it, many comics have done it, that you can make him bland. If you have just the good do leader that is trying to help everybody, if that's just your characteristic, there's not much interesting there, because what can you do if you always know? And if you put in a situation with all of these X-Men characters, but you always know this character is going to react this one way, you get a little less invested. You got to find some way to make that still interesting. And I think that's where they did this, as far as the ruse, right? Where you go, oh, really? This is, because when he leaves, you go, oh, this is not the X-Men I know. But then it shows, okay, he's still even him doing a ruse is kind of a little uncharacteristic, like, right? It's not exactly Scott Summers. Summers would be the guy that would stand put and go, we're gonna figure out a way to do this. But this was no, this isn't working. How would I kind of sneakily lie to my people, lie to my team, lie to even some people in the Brotherhood, or even they kind of hint that Scarlet Witch is attracted to him, So he's manipulating people, which is not a Scott Summers move. As like you said, the past 10 years, I feel like they're definitely changing some things. He had the kind of a villain turn for a little bit, and then he had the young Scott come in, and now with House X, they're definitely kind of spicing up a little bit. But the classic character arc or type of Scott Summers has always been the point A to point B. We're going to do this, and we're going to do this as good as we can. So I like the things they do with Scott in this, and I think there's some good dynamics with every single character, and they get flushed out more down the line. But even this little issue, I think he's him and Jean are definitely the full on lead. So I like that.
Yeah, it was nice seeing them take center stage in that. Any other favorite parts or moments you want to talk about?
I think I just got a few. I do like Beast a lot in this iteration. I like that he's just kind of this like traveler walking there when we meet in the bar. I like that because every other Beast is gonna be, even though he's this blue haired, quote unquote monster, as the public might call him, he's very prim and proper. He's very well spoken. But this guy, he's almost a bit more on the Wolverine side, where he's he's a bar, he's drinking. He doesn't want to fight, but if you do, he'll jump to the ceiling and kick you right in the face. So and I like just even his attire. I love the little Easter eggs when they say they set up we tested on these animals and everything was fine, but some of them did turn blue. And I remember reading that.
Yep, and it was like, oh, here we go.
Yeah, and I remember reading that first time, being like, oh my goodness, they did it. And just little stuff like even on where is it, on the Savage Lands, in the one of the panels, you can see Gambit off to the side, and it's just little things of like you're talking about in the Ultimates in general. It's just, when's this gonna happen? When's that gonna happen? The other thing I want to say is I think all of the X-Men comics kind of have this kind of vibe to them, but this more than ever, as far as the Ultimate one, I think I always compare these to like Mission Impossible, especially that mission in Croatia. They feel like that, where it feels like Scott Summers, is the Ethan Hunt, and he's put together a team, and they break up and they do all this stuff. And in these 6 issues, even then, they're going to multiple places. They're talking to the president, and that's happened before, but this feels more, and that's why I feel like this could be MCU inspiration as well, because this feels more organized. It feels more like we are a team. We are almost like an agency, like MI6, and we're going to places almost as hired guns to stop things. And I kind of like that element of, this Mission Impossible team of mutants together doing things. Let's see. I don't know if I have anything else I haven't shout out. Do you have anything else to shout out that you haven't?
No, I think you said a lot there. And again, this is, I mean, being just 6 issues, there's a lot that happens, from the introduction of the characters to the first attack of the Sentinels to the team going out as a team and Beast getting seriously hurt and injured, Scott leaving the team, Wolverine revealing, who he is at that point, and then the ending arc in the invasion of DC with Magneto and what happens with that. I think in 6 issues, Millar and the Kuberts do not only amazing art, but the writing is just, there's some things that are a little quick, but we'll forgive that because again, they were fleshing out more stories at that point. But it is a great introduction to a new universe with X-Men, with nods to the past and winks with a new spin on it. And I think they did an outstanding job with it.
Yeah, my only 2 last things was, to touch upon what you were saying. I think that is my only negative, that I think it's difficult because we're not talking about other volumes, so I think they do a good job eventually of kind of broadening that out, but it does feel very like breakneck pace of we're moving, we're going quick. I think if this was maybe even 7 or 8 issues, maybe one more to give a little breather, but even then, I think like you said, it's kind of the destination and the characters and what they're doing are so rich, you give it a pass. It's kind of like if you rush and then you don't like the product, then you go, well, it's because you were rushing. Where this, they had a lot of ground to cover, and I feel like they kind of had to, like Marvel was saying with X-Men, they were a little down on it, and they were just wondering how can we spice up. I feel like it is rushed, but I feel like they needed to kick the door down and say, no, we're here, we're new. And this, my other last cool thing to shout out, I love the way Charles defeats Magneto, with just becoming a human magnet, just that art style and everything, and just even like at one point, like Bobby's like, oh, my fillings, like you can see how powerful Magneto is, but he gets that helmet off, and just that realization when he looks over Pietro and he sees it, they throw him up the sky. And I also remember too, is obviously maybe some stuff happens again down the line, but even at that moment, Charles it seems like he kills him, and that was a big thing because Charles to me isn't one of those
Yeah.
superheroes where I go, oh, he doesn't kill, but he's not really a violent type of guy. And I guess I didn't talk about him just quickly. I really like this Charles because I always prefer my Charles Xavier a bit of a dick. I like it. The original X-Men, he was like that. I feel like in the 90s, he definitely got more Gandalf, like, I'm wise and I'll tell you the right way. And everyone's like, you're the dad figure. I like when he's kind of the boss where it's like, you know what? Screw Charles. Like, he didn't know what he's talking about. Like, he's doing, I like when he's kind of the more Dumbledore, where it seems like he is lying or keeping things secret. They did that a few times in the movies, but it always felt like, he's just Charles. That's the one positive I will give Dark Phoenix, the newest movie. I think it was not a great movie, but I liked where they were going, where Xavier did, like, he was doing all these things for the press and whatnot, and the other X-Men were kind of resenting him because it's like, what are you doing this for, us or them? And he's in this balance of, he's trying to keep the peace, but he's trying to keep his family and friends safe. And I think they, even in these 6 issues, established that well. And I remember when he seemingly killed him, I was like, wow, this Charles, he doesn't mess around. So I do like those new shades we've seen before, because Charles kind of, if you look at it in the past, he's kind of started as more of an asshole and then progressed into a nicer person. They kind of degressed him, but I think in the right way, because I think they kind of needed it for this. Like I said, it's a bit more harsher version of the X-Men, a bit more brutal, and I think he fit right in.
No, I like it. Well, before we head on to some of our last questions as we close out the episode, is when he throws Magneto up there, he goes, "Goodbye, old friend. Give my regards to the dodo."
Yeah. That's a cold line to say,
Yeah, it's a great line to kind of end our little dive into it. But no, if you haven't read it, definitely read this. If it's on the whole series is on Marvel Universe.
Oh yeah,
Comixology has it. It is definitely, you, like I said, how I read it, and I know you kind of echoed it, Travis, is that if you've read X-Men for a long time and you know the major story arcs, that's going to be the fun of it. How are they going to bring those story arcs? How are they going to bring in those characters? I think that's a great thing that they did with Ultimate. So, but before we kind of look at the impact and some of your last thoughts, we're going to take a little quick ad break. As you know, everyone, these ads help Geek Ultimate Alliance keep the lights on. We don't get to choose what ads come on, but they can be a bit loud. So I want to give you a 3 count in order to turn the volume down before they come on. 3, 2, 1. We'll be right back. Looking at some of the impact just on its initial release, just a couple of stats I want to throw out at you. Millar shaped Ultimate X-Men into a commercial hit, consistently outselling its sister titles Extreme X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, and staying just ahead of Grant Morrison's experimentally and very popular New X-Men run. The series' first arc sold extremely well. The first issue sold out, and the 4th and 5th issue sold more than 100,000 copies each to the U.S. comic book stores alone. And the series itself ran for 100 issues. So, obviously a success. I agree with you that you'd mentioned earlier, towards the end, it got a little, it was kind of running out of steam. But I think as a whole, it is a very strong run.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree. And I just remember, seeing that cover of the very first issue of Wolverine looking the way he did. And even that way, like the new suit, he kind of just looked almost a little more anime-ish if you look at him, just in that cover, not really in the story. But I just remember it being in my small circle of friends, just being the talk of the town before it came out. And then once it came out, it became like, oh, I can't wait to read this. And it just feels like that. There's other, like I said, I think Ultimates was big, but it felt like that and Spider-Man really splash and really hit, and it's become it. Like I said, that's part of the reason why I picked it. It's kind of become a nostalgia. It's kind of one of my touch points of, I saw the 90s animated show, I was reading Claremont, but this was my first one, and I feel like this was the first one for many people, because I feel like even if you weren't reading the maybe Miss Volume 1 or Volume 2, lots of people are like, oh, have you seen what they're doing with X-Men? You got it. It reminds me a lot of what's happening with House of X right now, where X-Men for a while had lots of great characters maybe this past decade, but was kind of murky. Their timeline is one of the messiest timelines, but House of X came out and it gave a lot of people like, have you been reading this? Oh, they're doing this. They're changing this up. So it's funny we're talking about this. It feels kind of similar to that. It felt like it, like I said, talk of the town, and it makes sense. It's still an arc people talk about.
You had me at when you say House of X, Dawn of X. I just my spidey sense picks up and says, oh my gosh, I so love it. I've told people I've never been more excited to read an X-Men title for a very long, like after Avengers versus X-Men, I kind of slowly dropped off of it. And House of X, Dawn of X, no, it's going to be House of X, Powers of 10.
Yeah.
Where I'd never been so like enthralled by reading that. It's just outstanding. So a story for another day. We don't want to get too much into
Oh yeah,
that.
one day
Um,
you and I will for sure talk about House of X as
yes.
the podcast in itself. So yeah, definitely
Yep.
stay tuned. But I'm same thing as you. I dropped out kind of Avengers, X-Men, and then that brought me right back in. Hickman is he's such a talented guy in that whole team. So
Yeah. So what makes this one of your favorite arcs that you wanted to why do you keep coming back to this?
yeah, like I said, I think it did some new things. It changed some dynamics for some personal reasons. Like I said, the Wolverine G thing really threw me off in a good way. It's like, okay, this is a new X-Men, and we already touched upon Scott leaving, Magneto, and I think that's where it is. It's kind of getting an old classic. It's like how, if you love Mexican food or a pizza, you can love a pizza and have all the same toppings, but this is that same pizza, but with a few new toppings. Maybe it's missing some of those other toppings you like, but maybe these new toppings are quite good too. And I think it is just it does come down to I just remember it was that first where I'm buying a comic book where it's just that one little paper issue, and when you're reading them for the first time, it's like, oh, they are small. They're only 22 pages, 23. This is nuts. But I remember the hype and the buildup of every week being like, oh, what's next and what's going to happen, and like you already we both talked about how what could be the story. So I returned to it just because I think it is a very fun, very well written variation on the X Men. Like I said, it's still relevant. I think that's the key of X Men. I think that's what some of the movies miss and some comics miss. It's good to have a X-Men mutants brawl, big fight, we're going to destroy the world. And that does happen a little bit in this, of course, near the end. But the core issue of X-Men always should be about relatability, racism, exclusion, things like that. They are supposed to be the little guys, the guys that are the most prosecuted for no reason, just because they were born this way. And that's why I feel this is, like I said, reading it again this past week, it's still relevant and still hits on themes that we're still talking about today politically. So that to me is where X-Men can be timeless, and it just kind of has that timeless aspect. Yeah, and yeah, it's like the art, like the characters. I returned to it this week, obviously, but it's one that I will many times. I'll hand on to my children. Big fan of Ultimate X-Men.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And usually my next question is, can you see it as a movie or TV show? Well, we've kind of gotten that in many different iterations, and you kind of talked about earlier, this could be a blueprint for the MCU to follow when bringing them into MCU proper. So
Yeah, no, like I said, I won't. I already touched upon it, like you said, but I think there's inspirations they will definitely take from this. I could see this in a maybe a mixture of House of X, kind of those two things of pick and take. We've talked about that
mhm,
with Civil War. Of cherry pick the ideas that work for your universe. You don't got to adapt fully. So something like the way Jean is, I could see them going that route. We kind of got two versions of Jean already, being a bit more quieter, a bit more good girl who's having
mhm.
troubles and can't control her powers. I could see them taking this route. I think that this route with Wolverine would be the great way to go because everybody has Hugh Jackman in their mind, this hero. This guy's been doing it for years. Imagine for the mainstream audience, they meet Logan and he's the bad guy at start. I think there's tons of potential. So I think definitely you'll see inspirations of this down the line.
That's awesome. So, last two questions are, you know, who would this, how would this arc, who would this appeal to, and what's your elevator pitch to someone who's never read Ultimate X-Men?
I think as far as who it appeals to, if you're, I hate to say that cop out answer, but I think anybody, because if you're, unless you absolutely just don't like the X Men, then you don't read it. But if you've never read it, if you've only read new X Men, if you've only read old X Men, it we talk about has a sprinkle of kind of everything, different characters, and these are just the first 6 issues. Down the line, you meet a bunch of characters. You go to Weapon X, you have returns, you have twists, and everything like that. You think Wolverine's dark in these issues, man? There is some stuff that you wouldn't see coming happening. So I think it's a ride. I think it's something that's now because it's 2000s. I'm sure a lot of people have read it, but this is not your kind of your dad's X-Men. So if you haven't read it, even if you think, these changes are a little weird, stick with it. But my elevator pitch is exactly what we've talked about. It's the pizza you know and love, but with a few different flavors. They might taste a little different, but eventually you're gonna go, you know what? I do like feta cheese on my pizza now, and that's gonna stick around. And that's why I'd say that it's the pizza you know and love with something a little new.
All right, I like that. I think you might be the first one comparing a comic to food. I like it.
I use food comparisons way too much, and pizza as well, because pizza is my all-time favorite food. I could eat that legitimately every day. I have a problem, but I love pizza. Melted cheese is my go-to. So
There you go. Nothing wrong with that. So, any final thoughts before we say our goodbyes?
no, I just want to thank you for having me on because I was a fan of the show before we even did this network or worked together, everything like that. I love your deep dives in all these stories, and they're ones that sometimes I haven't read, and then I'll listen to them, and either I'll listen the whole way through and go, "Oh, I gotta read this," or I'll stop and go, "Okay, I gotta listen to this." This is a great show. I love listening to it. I love comic books, and thanks for having me on because I much like you and I've talked about Marvel Alliance. X-Men is my Marvel jam. Wolverine my favorite character. I love these characters so much; they mean a lot to me. So I was happy to. I've never talked about Ultimate X-Men in a like in-depth platform like this. So thanks for having me on. And whether obviously I'll be talking to you every Monday, but other than that, if I ever come on again, I'm excited to. Yeah, thank you for hosting me.
Yeah, no, definitely. Of course, definitely be coming back soon. Would love to have you back, either continue Ultimate X-Men or something completely different. So, Nova, thank you so much. So, before I say goodbye, why don't you tell people how they can follow you and plug our shows, I guess.
Yeah, just Travis Beastdale on Twitter. You can find me Marvel Alliance. You can find me on the GUA network. Sometimes just doing other guest stuff. Geekverse. By the time this comes out, I think we're about to, or we're hitting our 5-year anniversary. We cover. It's kind of a weekly podcast with movie, TVs, reviews. We've been doing that for a while. We're live streaming now, so that's good. But yeah, just hit me up if you want to talk to me. Hey, if you want to come talk about all the X-Men, I'd love to talk. Like someone hit me up and because that one day I don't know if I want to do because they're not as great, but someone come hit me up and talk to me about what Wolverine does to Scott in that cave because that is the shockingest thing I've maybe ever read as a child. So I'd love to talk about any Ultimate X-Men with you. So hit me up there.
There you go. So go at Travis with that. Tell me your theories. So, all right, listeners. So we've come to another end of an episode of World's Finest True Believers. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Finest Believers and me personally at Chris Balga. You can follow the Geek Ultimate Alliance Network on Twitter at GUA Pod Network. If you're already subscribed, you notice all the network of shows that we bring to you. You can email the show at worldsfinesttruebelievers@gmail.com. Feel free to tweet or email if you want to be a guest, provide feedback, or ask questions. Everything's open at that point. We'd love to have you on. Love to answer your questions. And as always, if you feel the need, we would most appreciate you. If you like the shows, like all the shows on the network, some of them, rate us on Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you're listening to on your podcatcher of choice. And as always, listeners, thank you so much for taking your time. You are all truly world's finest true believers. And whenever you listen to this morning, afternoon, or in the evening, or in the deepest night, thank you so much. Thank you, Travis. And I'll be coming back at you very soon. Bye-bye, everyone.